Some of my international audience will have already seen the Scots Gold on their shelves. For the UK audience, maybe not so much. But in any case, welcome to this ultimate guide for Scots Gold. Hi there, welcome to No Nonsense Whisky. My name's Vin PF, and on today's episode we've got a very special episode because this is the first time I've done one of these ultimate guides because I've got all 4 of the bottles in the range, thanks to the guys over at Charles Edge for sending these over to me for review. But today we've got all 4 bottles in the Scots Gold range. This is part of the Charles Edge portfolio. Now, Charles Edge is, they've been around since 1999, but this is really the start of their kind of like, their sort of collection. So they started this in 2018. This whole collection in a kind of like collaboration with Dominic Ruskell, the late Dominic Ruskell, of course. Now, the idea behind these is that these are in sort of direct competition with the blended market. So we're talking about things like Johnny Walker, Ballantine's, Dewar's, that sort of thing. And dare I say, you know, you could sort of bracket these against the supermarket blends as well. But as we'll get into it a bit later on, it's a big step up from those, which is a good thing, of course. So what I'll be doing today is going through each one of these in turn. I've got my Glencairns down here. We'll be doing a little tasting on each of them, letting you know a bit more information about each bottle, what's interesting about each one, and why you should care, basically. Let's get straight into it, shall we? One of the key things that we need to know about all of these is that they're obviously all 40%. They're all probably chill filtered and probably added colour, but that's not on trial today. You know, we're literally comparing these against their actual competitors. They also are very, very reasonably priced, and we'll go into the price of each of these. Now, there's some links in the description below. UK market guys, they are going to be sort of pushing this in the UK fairly soon, but you can get at least the first 3 of these on the Drink Supermarket, and that's a non-affiliated link. I've just found that online for you. But very soon they're going to be launching a new website where you'll be able to purchase these directly from Charles Edge, or probably on a scotsgold.com or something like that. But in any case, if you're watching this in the future, check out the links in the description below because you should be able to get hold of these fairly easily. They are worldwide reaching as well, so places like the States, Australia, Germany, maybe Japan. I think you should be seeing these on shelves already. If you have and you've tried them, then please do let me know in the comments below what you think about each one, because I would love to hear your opinions, and probably so would the guys at Charles Edge as well, because this is a unique opportunity to try all 4 of them in one go. So the first one then, we have the red label, and this one differentiates itself somewhat because it has aged in oak on the bottom here. Obviously direct comparisons will have to be made. You can't ignore the fact that we have a red label and a black label, but that's not indicative of anything at all. It's just, you know, a very keen similarity between them. This one here has a grain malt differential. It says 8% grain and 92% malts in here. I imagine it's mostly 3-year-old whiskies in here because obviously that's the legal minimum. Some of the others have age statements, and they've sort of mentioned about the possible ages that go into these, which I'll go into again a bit later on. But again, for these first 2, we're pretty much assuming that they're around about that 3-year mark. There's a possibility of some slightly older whiskies in there as well, but it's going to be around that sort of mark. Again, a 40%. Now, this one retails in the UK for about £18, so we're talking very cheap. This is very cheap whiskey. The sort of standard price for the really bog standard supermarket blends is probably around about that kind of £15 mark, so it's a couple of quid extra, and it's sort of well within the region of its like competitor with the same colour label. Yeah, let's get into it and see what we've got on the nose, shall we? Cheers. Now for me, it's obviously quite grain forward. It's a youthful whiskey. It's 3 years old probably, so we've got a lot of that youthful grain knocking around in here, but it comes along with bags of fresh mint. If you ever had grown fresh mint in your garden, you know what I mean. That kind of like that fresh mintiness. For me, it doesn't really rear its head as kind of like spearmint or peppermint or anything like that. It's just literally like a fresh, you can twist it in your fingers, leaves mintiness. There's some vanillas and fudges knocking around in there as well. Overall, it's fairly pleasant nose. Let's get onto the palate. Now, the one thing that surprised me about this, I've called it surprisingly viscous. Now, I don't want you to take my words out of context because obviously, you know, a 40% chill filtered, relatively young. It's not like super thick, but I was expecting something like wafer thin, you know, wateriness. But that's not what's happening here. It's got a really nice, surprisingly viscous feel to it. More of those grains from the nose are coming through, and we're getting a lot of kind of tropical minty notes as well coming through on the palate, which is really nice. Let me try another sip. Now the finish expands out. It's quite long, spicy, minty. Lots going on with it. And again, it is quite a youthful whiskey, so to be fair to it, it's not going to be for everybody. It's not going to be up everyone's street. But I imagine for a discerning whiskey drinker like people watching this right now, that the livery says, you know, enjoy it neat or with cocktails, but I would imagine this is leaning more on the cocktail side of things. Obviously, perfectly happy to drink that straight as well. But yeah, as we get through the range, you'll see what I mean. Without further ado then, let's get on to the black label. Now this is only going for about £1 more. On that same website, Drink Supermarket, it's going for £19. I think the RRP is something like 20. So there's not much differentiating itself there. The only thing that differentiates itself on the label is that it says patiently matured instead of aged in oak. Again, we're assuming it's going to be sort of that roughly 3-year-old mark. It could have a few extra things in there, and again, they have this as like a minimum of 12 distilleries. I don't know about the actual makeup of these. They might be different and they might change over time. When they get these whiskies in, they are sort of obviously getting the barrels, and then they're selecting them, and then they're putting them into a large kind of vatting, marrying tun to even those flavours out. So that happens across this range as well. Let's get into the actual tasting of this one as well now. Cheers. On the nose. Now for me, it's there's only a very kind of narrow margin between the two of these. Now this one is it has a little bit more mustiness to it. It has a little bit less mintiness to it. This one here is a 10% malt, 90% grain. So we're moving that kind of barrier a little bit down here. So that's where that extra pound's coming from, I imagine. Yeah, and it's kind of upped with the kind of vanillas and the fudges. So this is getting more on that kind of like classic-y Scotch kind of nose anyway. Let's get onto the palate. Yeah, this is, for me, it's noticeably less harsh, if that's the right word to say. Obviously, youthful grain tends to bring a certain amount of spiciness and harshness with it. And this one here just edges that out just a little bit more and brings in more of those kind of typical flavours that we like, those kind of like those vanillas, those fudges, those honeys, that sort of thing. The tropical notes have tended to drop off a little bit, and the pepperiness has dropped off a little bit as well. So if you prefer a kind of, dare I say the S word, a smoother dram, this is definitely heading in that direction. And for the extra pound, personally, my personal preference, the extra pound, this is well worth the extra on that. And so far, this one is my favourite of the bunch. But yeah, a pretty good tidy dram for the price nonetheless. The finish is fairly medium to long, very peppery, very spicy. It's just a really nice tasting dram, to be fair, and well balanced. I think is probably the good thing to say about it. Very well balanced. Third, then we've got the 8-year-old. This is simply called 8-year-old. Some people call it the silver label, based on the label design here, but online you'll see it as the Scots Gold 8-year-old. Now this one here is a little bit different. So discerning Scotch drinkers, single malt drinkers, this is where you want to prick your ears up a little bit, because although we've got an 8-year-old age statement, the marketing says that the majority of the malts are somewhere between 10 and 15 years, but I think they're mostly between the 10 and 12 years. Keyword there is malts, so this one here is a 20% malt, 80% grain. So if you're talking about that differentiation there, so the malts part of it has some good age to it. They didn't mention anything about the grain, so making a rash assumption that there's probably some fairly youthful grain in this, but that's how it works. But obviously it's a minimum of 8 years still, so I'm game. I quite like grain as a generic whiskey anyway, so yeah, the more age the better. But the cool thing about this one is that they've also confirmed that there's a little drop of Islay malt in this as well. Don't know the percentages, and you'll see from my tasting notes that I think it's only really making a small influence, but it's just enough, I think. This one sells for about £24, so yeah, we're going up a little bit now, getting into that kind of like, it's mid-cheapish. I used to say things like the sort of 25 to 30 quid mark was the kind of medium range whiskey, but that really isn't the case anymore. Medium range whiskies tend to be something like 35 to 50 quid now, but that's the way the market's going, so it's nice to see some cheap stuff anyway. But yeah, let's get onto the nose and see what we've actually got in this one. Now this one's a big step up in my opinion, big step up from the other two. The kind of minty grainy notes have kind of all but gone and been replaced by what I would call typical Scotch flavours, things like honeys, vanillas, that sort of thing, the fudges. There's also a nice little bit of floral heatheriness in there. Now I don't detect any smoke on the nose, but that's because my palate is a little bit blown out with heavy peat these days. So when it's really subtle, I don't tend to pick it up quite so easily. And if this was blind, I definitely wouldn't be picking up at all. But because I'm looking for it, I'm picking up a bit of a heatheriness to it, which is probably that influence there. But it's just got a bit more depth, a bit more complexity to it. Dare I say, a sessionable dram. And I've tried quite a lot of this over the last few days. And the one thing I can unequivocally tell you about this range is that because they're all sitting at 40% but pack plenty of flavour, you can drink this all night pretty much. Okay, let's try on the palate. Okay, bringing the S word back in, this is just an all-round smoother experience than even the black label. So we're kind of building up towards that kind of like that smooth palate. The 8 years has really done this a lot of favours. I'm getting a lot of warm honeys on this one, a lot of vanillas. Again, not so much smoke, but there's that heatheriness, that floralness that's coming through that I'm going to attribute to that Islay malt. But yeah, for me, maybe a waft of smoke, but it does tend to rear itself for me as charred oak rather than smoke. So yeah, if you do see the word Islay anywhere on the marketing and you're worried about that because you don't like smoke that much, I wouldn't worry about it too much. But yeah, certainly if you're looking for a high peated dram, this one probably isn't it. But it's just a nice, well balanced, well rounded whiskey. And for my palate, if I was tasting this blind, I don't think I'd be putting this in the kind of grain heavy bracket, if you know what I mean. You know, when you're talking about a blended Scotch, 80% grain, 20% malt, you know, it's leaning on the malt a lot more than it is the grain in this occasion. Whereas these two, the grain is definitely forward, and the youthful grain especially is definitely forward. So yeah, the malt is doing the heavy lifting on this one for sure. And at 24 quid, that's a bit of a steal, to be honest. Finally then, let's check out this last one. Now this one here, I've got a litre bottle here, as you might see, it's a slightly different shape. All of these I think are available in 700 and 1 litre, depending on where you are in the world, of course. But yeah, this one here is simply named the 12 year. I haven't seen anyone call this a brown label or whatever you want to call that colour there. But yeah, a 12-year-old whiskey, not to be sniffed at. Now, we've been talking about percentages all the way through. Now this one here, it changes the pace a little bit because it actually goes the other way. Now we're talking 15% malt and 85% grain. But of course, we have a minimum of 12 years in the cask for every whiskey that's involved in here, which is cool. Also, it states that the malt part of it as well, it could be up to 15 years, and there are some 15-year-old whiskies in here. Don't know again the percentages of those, but it's important things to note. Let's try on the nose then. And this one typically is RRP of 30 quid, but I haven't seen this one for sale in the UK yet. So I can't find any retailers that can confirm that for sure, but I imagine that when this gets released, that's the pricing list that they've given me, so that's basically what it's going to be. Might be a little bit cheaper, as with all of these ones here today. The RRP is actually £1 more than all of the prices I've quoted you so far, but I'm giving you the prices I found online. So hopefully this will be something like 28, 29 quid, we'll see. But that can only go in our favour, right? Let's get onto the nose and see what we've got. Now this one is an entirely different beast. It's so gentle, whereas the other ones had kind of like a boost of some kind of like, that kind of grain forwardness. I keep going on about grain forwardness, but you know what I'm talking about. This one doesn't have that at all. It's really gentle, really soft. There's some tannic elements going on there, some slight leatheriness, some slight charred oak, and bags of citrus. I'm getting almost like a lime. The official tasting notes say orange, but for me it kind of leans itself a little bit more towards the lemony lime side of things. There's also bags of honeys, vanillas, and this is the first one that really pushes that orchard fruit, those kind of apples, those pears. This is the first one that where those really are shining through a little bit more. So that kind of 15% malt, 85% grain doesn't really matter on this one because of the age is taking a bit more of the slack on this one, so that the malts don't have to almost. Let's try on the palate. Okay, so for me, the number one flavour I'm getting on this is butterscotch. Big time, you know, I mean, there's some other stuff going on as well, but that's the number one flavour coming through. Vanilla's coming through. This is more of those flavours coming through from the nose, so we're talking a little bit more of those citrusy notes, a bit more of those honeys, those vanillas, apples, pears, that sort of thing. It's definitely one of those whiskies that transfers quite nicely from the nose to the palate. The finish, again, this is a little bit of a weird one because I would say where this has been long, medium long, medium long, this is definitely medium. Yeah, the finish is not as long on this one, but that's, in my opinion, that's for its benefit, because the finish on these earlier ones really is that it's the mint and the pepperiness that's doing that heavy lifting to get that finish out and nice and tingly. But I also found them quite numbing, whereas this one here is just an all-round kind of juicy, flavourful experience. So I'll sacrifice a little bit of length on the finish for a more well-rounded experience, let's say. Now for me, if I'm picking favourites, it's going to be these two at the back end here, and that's not me being an age statement snob or anything like that. They're just a genuinely, for what I'm looking for in a whiskey, these two give me more of that experience that I'm looking for, that casual sipping experience. And I genuinely couldn't pick between the two because it would be mood dependent. If I'm after something with a little bit more complexity, I think I would probably pick the 8. I think that's probably slightly more complex to my palate. Whereas the 12 year is just a really nice sipping experience. So if I'm looking for a casual drinking whiskey or even a sessionable starter whiskey to an evening, definitely these two would do it. For my personal preferences, I think these two are more likely to be of interest to tasting people, but for my personal use, it's probably going to be cocktail usage or just showing people they're interested when they come round, pouring them a dram of the journey that goes through this. And that's the kind of cool thing about doing a flight like this, is that I'm able to explore the journey that they're trying to convey to us through these whiskies. All of them have their validity in different ways, shapes or forms. But again, for me, from a drinker's point of view, from I mean, my standard goes to these days are high ABV and peated. So I'm looking for kind of mouthfeel experience and kind of general all-round goodness, and these two fit that bill for me. Definitely. Okay, now this has been a slightly longer video, so thanks for sticking with me if you have done. I'd love to know your thoughts on what you think about this style of video, because it's not something that I thought I'd be able to do before, but if I'm able to get more vertical flights on the go, I would love to know if you are interested in seeing more information about that. I've got a lot more Charles Edge coming along the way, as you might see, but I'm going to do individual reviews on them, or at least some couplers of verses as well, because I think they're all single cask, the majority of them, so they deserve their own spot. But yeah, as I said at the beginning of the show, if you've tried some of these Scots Gold, I'd love to hear your opinions in the comments below. We'll have a little chat about what you think about the brand, and if you're in the UK, let me know if you're excited to try some of these. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again on more No Nonsense Whiskey videos.